I built that house with my hands, my savings, my years, and my love. I did not cut a single corner. I did not miss a single payment. I drove 4 hours every weekend for 2 years to watch it go up brick by brick. And when it was finally done, when the floors were laid and the lights were on and the garden was blooming, I drove out there one final time to surprise my parents for their anniversary. My sister's husband answered the door in a bathrobe. He looked at me like I was the intruder, like I was the stranger standing on the wrong porch. He crossed his arms and told me I should have called first. My own parents stood behind him and said nothing, not one word. My mother looked at the floor, my father looked at the wall. And that man who had never paid a single bill, who had never lifted a single hammer, who had watched me sacrifice for 2 years and smiled like everything was fine, looked me dead in the eye and said, "This is a family home now, Marcus, not your personal project." I did not scream, I did not cry on that porch. I smiled, got back in my car and drove away, but something inside me changed that day, something cold and quiet and very, very focused. And that was only the beginning of what I was about to find out. Before we go any further, I need you to sit with something, not the rage, not the disbelief. Sit with this. Marcus did not do anything wrong. She loved her family with everything she had. She gave until there was almost nothing left to give. And the people who were supposed to protect her used that love like currency. So I want to ask you honestly, before this story unfolds, what would you have done in that moment on that porch? Would you have fought back right then? Or would you have done what Marcus did and walked away quietly, already knowing that patience and proof are sharper than any argument? Drop your answer in the comments. Because what happens next is going to test everything you think you know about loyalty, blood, and what family actually means. My name is Marcus, and I want to start by telling you something that most people in my position are too embarrassed to say out loud. I'm not a victim. I'm not telling this story because I want sympathy. I'm telling this story because what was done to me was done in silence across years by people who looked me in the face every single holiday and smiled. And I need people to understand how that happens. How a good person, a careful person, a person who checks every detail and reads every contract can still be completely blindsided by the people they trust the most. I grew up in a modest house in a small town. My parents were hard workers. My father drove trucks. My mother cleaned offices. We did not have much, but we had each other, and my parents made sure we always felt that love was the most important thing in any room. I believed that completely. I believed it for a long time. I have one sister. Her name is Renata. She is 4 years older than me. Growing up, I admired her. She was loud where I was quiet. She was bold where I was careful. She always knew what she wanted, and she went after it without hesitation. I thought that was strength. I would later understand it was something else entirely. Renata got married when she was 27. Her husband's name is Cliff. Cliff came into our family like a smooth, easy introduction. He was handsome in a soft, forgettable way. He made jokes at dinner. He remembered birthdays. He called my parents mom and dad within the first 3 months, which I thought was sweet at the time. My parents loved him immediately. He had a way of making people feel like the most important person in the room, which I would later realize is a very specific and very practiced skill. I was 23 when Cliff joined the family. I was also quietly already doing better than anyone in my family understood. I had started a logistics consultancy 2 years earlier, right out of college. It was small at first, just contracts, spreadsheets, and late nights. But I was organized and I was hungry, and by the time I was 25, I had 3 long-term clients and a team of 8 people. I did not talk about money in my family. My parents raised us to believe that talking about money was rude, so I never told anyone how well I was doing. I just kept working and quietly building. The dream of the house started at my father's 62nd birthday dinner. He said almost to himself that he had always wanted to grow old somewhere with a garden and a real kitchen and enough space for the grandchildren to run around. He said it the way tired people say things they have stopped believing can ever happen. My mother touched his hand and said maybe someday. And I sat across the table and I made a decision right then, quietly, without telling anyone. I was going to build them that house. I did not announce it. I did not make a speech. I started planning in private. Over the next 4 months, I researched land, zoning laws, contractors, architects, and building costs. I found a beautiful piece of land about 2 hours from where my parents lived and 40 minutes from the small town where I grew up. It was a wide, flat plot with old trees along the back fence and a creek you could hear if you stood still enough. The moment I saw it, I knew. I bought the land outright. I hired an architect named Priya who had designed 3 houses I had visited and studied before choosing her. I told her exactly what I wanted. 4 bedrooms, a kitchen my mother could actually cook in, a proper garden with a covered porch, a guest suite on the ground floor in case my parents ever had trouble with stairs, heated floors in the bathroom because my mother's joints ached in winter, a wide driveway for my father's truck. Every single detail was chosen for them. The build cost came in at $380,000 by the time it was finished, including land, materials, permits, landscaping, and furnishing. I paid every invoice myself, no loans, no cosigners, no help from anyone. I told my parents there was a surprise coming. I told them to be patient. They assumed it was something small, maybe a vacation, maybe a new car. I let them assume. For 2 years, I drove out to that build site almost every weekend. I became friendly with the foreman, a quiet man named Art who taught me more about foundations and load-bearing walls than I ever expected to learn. I took photographs every week. I watched that house rise from a concrete slab into something I was deeply proud of. I told no one in my family except my parents what I was building, and even they did not know the scale of it until it was nearly done. Renata did not know. Cliff did not know. I was careful about that, not because I was hiding it from them in a suspicious way, but because I wanted the surprise to be clean. I did not want advice. I did not want opinions. I did not want anyone touching this project except me and the people I was paying. When the house was 8 weeks from completion, I finally told my parents. I sat them down at their kitchen table, showed them the photographs, and watched my mother put her hand over her mouth and start to cry. My father was very still for a long time. Then he reached across the table and held both my hands and said, "Marcus, you are the most extraordinary person I have ever known." That was one of the best moments of my life. I told them I would have it ready for their 43rd anniversary. I told them we would do a proper reveal. My mother asked if Renata knew. I said not yet, and she nodded like she understood. I do not know exactly when my mother told Renata. I think it was within a week. I say that because Renata called me about 10 days after I told my parents, and the call was strange. She asked me how things were going. She asked about the build. She acted like she had just heard a vague rumor, but something in her tone was off. It was too casual. It was the kind of casual that takes effort. I told her the basics. She said it sounded beautiful. She said my parents were lucky to have me. She asked where the house was located. I gave her the general area but not the exact address. She did not push for it. I thought nothing of it at the time. The house was completed 4 days before my parents' anniversary. I coordinated with Art to do a final walkthrough, settled the last invoices, and got the keys. The plan was simple. I would drive my parents out on the morning of their anniversary, hand them the keys, and they would walk into their new home together. 2 days before the anniversary, Renata called again. She said she and Cliff wanted to be there for the reveal. She said it was a family moment and she did not want to miss it. I said of course. I gave her the address and told her to arrive by 10 in the morning. The morning of the anniversary, I woke up at 5. I drove out early to put fresh flowers in the entryway and make sure everything was perfect. I had arranged for a small breakfast spread to be set up in the kitchen. I had framed a photo of my parents from their wedding and hung it in the hallway near the front door. I stood in that empty house and felt more proud than I had ever felt in my life. My parents arrived at 10:15. I walked them up the front path and handed them the keys. My mother was trembling. My father opened the door and they walked in together, and both of them stopped moving for a moment, just stood there taking it in. My mother kept saying, "Marcus, Marcus, Marcus," like my name was the only word she could find. My father walked slowly through every room, touching the walls, opening windows, standing in the kitchen my mother had always wanted. Renata and Cliff arrived about 40 minutes later. Renata hugged me and said the house was unbelievable. Cliff shook my hand and said I had outdone myself. He walked through every room carefully, asking questions about square footage, the builder. The permits, I thought he was just curious. I thought he was just being thorough the way some people are. I was too happy that day to read anything into it. We had lunch together. My parents were glowing. My mother sat at her kitchen table and looked around like she could not believe any of it was real. My father stood in the garden for a long time looking at the creek trees. Cliff made a toast and said something about what it meant to have family that went above and beyond. Everyone raised their glasses. I smiled. I left that evening. I had a work trip beginning the next morning, 3 weeks in Houston for a major client project. I hugged my parents at the door and told them I would be back as soon as the trip ended. My mother made me promise to eat properly and sleep enough. I drove away with the radio up and my heart full. I called my parents twice a week during the Houston project. They sounded happy. They were getting used to the house. My mother had already started planning the garden layout. My father had found a spot in the garage for his tools. Everything sounded exactly the way it was supposed to sound. It was during the third week of the trip that something small happened that I did not fully understand at the time. My mother called me and the call was brief and slightly rushed. She said Renata was there and they were in the middle of something. I asked what they were doing. She said just some paperwork. I asked what kind. There was a pause and then she said just some home things, you know how Renata is with organizing. I said okay and told her I would call later. She said goodbye quickly. I called back that evening. My father answered. He sounded fine. He said everything was great. I let it go. I finished the Houston project and drove back on a Friday. I had not called ahead because I wanted to surprise my parents. I stopped and bought their favorite pastries from a bakery on the route. I was in a good mood. I had just closed a strong contract and I was thinking about everything I wanted to tell my parents over the weekend. I pulled up to the house at about 2 in the afternoon. There was an unfamiliar car in the driveway alongside my father's truck, a large black SUV I had never seen before. I assumed my parents had a guest. I parked, grabbed the pastry box, and walked up the front path. I knocked, no answer for a moment, then the door opened. Cliff was standing there in a gray bathrobe, not dressed, not looking like a visitor, looking like someone who lived there. There was a coffee mug in his hand and he was squinting slightly in the afternoon light like I had woken him from something comfortable. He looked at me, I looked at him. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. Then he said, "Marcus, hey, should have called ahead." I said I had come to see my parents. He stepped slightly to the side but did not open the door fully. I walked in. My mother was in the kitchen. She turned when she heard me come in and her face did something complicated. It went from surprise to relief to something else, something that looked almost like guilt. I asked where Dad was. She said he was in the garden. I walked through and found him on the porch bench. He stood up when he saw me and hugged me hard. He said he had missed me. Everything felt almost normal until I walked back through the house and noticed that 2 of the spare bedrooms had clothes in them. Adult clothes, a man's jacket over a chair, a woman's shoes near the door of one room, a row of toiletries lined up in the hall bathroom that had not been there when I left. I went back to the kitchen and asked my mother quietly where Renata was. She said Renata had gone out for groceries. Then I asked, as calmly as I could manage, whether Renata and Cliff were staying there. My mother said yes. She said they were having some trouble with their apartment lease and Cliff had some work in the area, so she had offered them the guest suite while they sorted things out. I nodded. I put the pastries on the counter. I said that was fine. I stayed for 2 hours, had tea with my parents, and drove home. I did not have a long conversation about it, not yet, but the drive home was very quiet inside me. Over the next week, I called my parents daily. Renata and Cliff were still there. Then the second week, still there, I called Renata and asked how the lease situation was going. She said things were complicated, but they were working it out. I asked how long they were planning to stay. She said she was not sure. I said okay. The fourth week I drove out again. The black SUV was still there. There were now boxes in the second guest room, not just a bag or 2 boxes, moving boxes. I walked through the house quietly while my mother made tea and I counted 5 boxes in that room, 2 bags of Cliff's gym equipment in the hallway, and a row of Cliff's shoes lined up near the front door like they had always lived there. I sat down with my mother and had a very direct conversation. I asked when Renata and Cliff planned to leave. My mother said they were going through a difficult time and she did not want to push them. I said I understood, but this was the home I had built for her and my father, not a long-term residence for Renata and Cliff. My mother looked at the table. She said she knew. She said she was sorry. She said things had gotten a little complicated. I asked what that meant. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said Cliff had mentioned some things about the house, about the title, about how, since the house was a gift to the family, it really should be in all of the family's names. I sat very still. I asked her to say that again. She repeated it carefully like she was reading from a script she had been handed but had not fully memorized. She said Cliff had explained that gift properties work differently legally and that it would be better for everyone if the ownership was formally shared. I said very quietly that my name was on the title, that the house was mine to gift, that I had never signed anything changing that. My mother did not respond right away. Then she said Renata had brought some documents a few weeks ago when I was in Houston, documents my parents had signed. She said Cliff had explained it was just a formality to protect the family. My blood went cold. I drove home that night and called my lawyer before I even took off my coat. Her name is Diana. She is patient and very good. I explained everything. She said she needed to pull the property records first thing Monday morning and to not sign or say anything to anyone over the weekend. I did not sleep that night. Monday morning, Diana called me at 8:45. She had pulled the records. The title had been amended. My parents had signed a document that added Cliff and Renata as co-owners of the property, each holding a 25% share. My parents held 25% each. I had been removed entirely. My name was not on that title anymore. I had been erased from the house I paid for, planned, built, and gifted. I was not a co-owner. I was not a partial holder. I was nothing. Legally, that house had nothing to do with me. Diana told me to stay calm. She said the document had some problems. The timing was problematic. The circumstances were problematic. There were questions about whether my parents, both older and without independent legal counsel, had truly understood what they were signing. She said there was a path. She said it would take time and documentation. She said I needed to gather everything. I said I had everything, every invoice, every permit, every receipt, every bank transfer, every photograph with timestamps, every email between me and the architect, me and the builder, me and the land office, 2 years of documentation. I had kept it all because I am the kind of person who keeps things. Diana said, "Good, let's begin." The next step was the hardest part of everything that came before it, not the legal process, the conversation with my parents. I drove out on a Wednesday evening unannounced. Renata's car was gone. Only my parents were home. I sat them down at the kitchen table, the one I had chosen for this room because my mother had admired it in a catalog she thought I had forgotten about. I put my hands flat on the table and I asked my parents directly whether they understood what they had signed. My father looked at my mother looked at her hands. My father said Cliff had explained it was paperwork to make the house more secure for everyone. He said Cliff had shown them where to sign and told them it was the right thing to do for the family's future. He said he had not read the full document because Cliff told him it was standard. I asked whether they had been given time to read it themselves. My father said there was a lot of it and Cliff had walked them through the main points. I asked whether they knew I had been removed from the ownership. My mother said she thought it was more of an addition, not a removal. She said she thought my name was still on it. I turned my phone around and showed them the current title document from the county records website. I showed them the 4 names listed. I showed them the absence of mine. My father went very pale. My mother put her hand over her mouth. I did not raise my voice. I said I was not angry at them. I said I understood that Cliff had been the one to guide this. I said I just needed them to understand what had happened and to understand that I was going to fix it. I said I needed them to be willing to help fix it. My father said whatever I needed. My mother nodded and started to cry. I held her hand for a while and then I drove home and called Diana again. The legal process that followed took several months and was not simple. Diana filed a challenge to the title amendment on the grounds of undue influence, lack of independent legal counsel for my parents, and fraudulent misrepresentation of the doc. Humans effect, we had strong evidence. We had my parents' own testimony. We had the timeline showing that the amendment was signed while I was in Houston, a fact that demonstrated it was done deliberately in my absence. We had Cliff's text messages to Renata, which my parents gave us access to from my father's phone, in which Cliff had written that they needed to move fast before Marcus gets back and looks into things. That message alone was worth more than anything I could have said in a courtroom. The discovery phase uncovered more than just that one message. There were conversations between Cliff and Renata that went back further than I had imagined. They had been discussing the house for months, long before it was finished. Cliff had been researching property law. Renata had been asking my mother questions about how the title was structured. There was a message from Renata to Cliff that said, "Mom says Marcus bought it outright. Nothing in both names yet. That means we have a window." A window. That was the word she used. A window, like my generosity was a gap they could slip through before I looked. I had to sit with that for a very long time. Renata called me during the legal process. She had apparently been informed by Cliff that things were getting complicated. She called me on a Sunday afternoon with a tone I had never heard from her before. Soft, slightly injured. She said she could not believe I was taking legal action against the family. She said I was making everyone miserable. She said if I had just talked to her first, we could have worked something out. I said we could still work something out. The something being she and Cliff vacating the house and signing back full ownership to the appropriate parties. She said that was not realistic. She said they had already made plans based on the housing situation. She said Cliff had turned down a job offer in another city because they were settled. I said I was sorry to hear that. She got louder. She said I was being selfish, that I had built the house as a gift and then turned it into a power play. She said gifts were supposed to be given without conditions. She said I was weaponizing my money. I said the house was a gift to our parents, not to her, not to Cliff, and that what she and Cliff had done was not a family arrangement. It was a legal manipulation executed while I was out of the state. She hung up. She did not call again for 3 weeks. When she did call, her tone had shifted again. This time she was warmer, almost like her old self. She said she had been thinking and she knew things had gotten out of hand. She said Cliff had pushed her into some decisions she was not fully comfortable with. She said she missed me. She said she just wanted her family back. I listened to all of it. Then I said I hoped she meant it and that if she did, the cleanest path forward was for her and Cliff to cooperate with the legal process and allow the correction to proceed without a fight. There was a long silence. Then she said she would have to talk to Cliff. I said I understood. She never followed through. Instead, Cliff hired a lawyer of his own. His argument was that my parents had signed the document voluntarily and that as the elder couple's chosen family members, he and Renata had a right to be included in a family home. He also claimed that Renata had contributed emotionally to the family over the years in ways that deserved recognition. Emotionally contributed, that was the legal argument. Diana almost laughed when she read it, almost. The turning point came through a combination of two things. The first was my parents' formal statements in which they stated clearly and under oath that they had not been given the full information, had not understood they were removing me, and had felt pressured by Cliff's urgency and authority. My father used the word pressured 3 times in his statement. My mother said she had asked to call me first and Cliff had told her it was better to handle it before I got back so I would not feel burdened by the paperwork. The second was a financial record I had not originally thought to include but that Diana insisted on. My complete payment history for the property, every single transfer, every single invoice paid, totaling $380,000, all in my name, all traceable, all documented over a 2-year period. There was not 1 cent of contribution from Renata or Cliff, not for the land, not for the build, not for the permits, not for the furnishings, not for the landscaping. Not for the kitchen cabinets my mother had circled in a magazine. Nothing. Their claim of shared family ownership was built on a document signed by 2 elderly people who had been told it was a formality. It had no other foundation. The case did not go to full trial. Cliff's lawyer must have looked at what Diana had assembled and understood that what they had was a losing argument made of paper and nerve. 6 weeks before the scheduled hearing, Cliff's side proposed a settlement conversation. Diana told me what the initial offer was. Cliff and Renata would agree to vacate the property within 90 days, return to a 50-50 split between my parents, and sign documentation releasing any future claim to the property in exchange for a waiver from me on legal costs. I said no. Diana asked what I wanted. I told her. I wanted the title returned to my parents' names only, with a legally recorded note in the property file documenting that the amendment had been executed through misrepresentation and was set aside on those grounds. I wanted Renata and Cliff out within 30 days, not 90. And I wanted a formal written acknowledgement from Cliff that he had misrepresented the nature of the document to my parents. Cliff's lawyer came back twice with variations. Diana held the line each time. On the 3rd round, they agreed to all of it except the 30-day vacancy, asking for 45. Diana looked at me. I said 45 was fine. The documents were signed on a Tuesday morning. I was not in the room. Diana handled it. She called me when it was done. I was sitting in my car in a parking garage in the middle of a regular workday, and I sat there for a few minutes after the call ended with my hands on the steering wheel and my eyes closed, feeling something I did not entirely have a word for. Not triumph, not relief exactly, something quieter than both of those, something like what you feel when you finally stop holding your breath after a very long time. The fallout moved in stages. Cliff and Renata vacated at day 44. My parents called me that evening to tell me the house was empty. My father said it felt strange. My mother said the house felt like itself again. I asked how they felt. My father said tired but right. I told him I was coming for the weekend. Renata did not speak to me for 4 months after the documents were signed. During that time, she apparently went through a period of telling a version of events to cousins and extended family members in which I had launched a legal attack on the family over a misunderstanding and had driven her and Cliff out of her parents' home. Several cousins messaged me to express concern or, in some cases, judgment. One aunt sent me a message saying that she had always thought I was too focused on money and that family should come first. I did not respond to any of those messages. I sent one reply to my aunt only, which said, "I built a $380,000 house for our family with my own money over 2 years. I am happy to send you the receipts if you need to understand the situation better." She did not reply. My parents, to their great credit, began to speak more honestly in those months. My mother in particular started having conversations with me that we had never really had before. She told me that she had felt uneasy the moment Cliff started asking questions about the title but had not wanted to say anything because she did not want to cause conflict. She said she had told herself it would all work out. She said she was sorry. She said those words several times in different conversations, and I believed her each time because I know my mother and I know she means what she says when it costs her something. My father was quieter about it, but one afternoon we were sitting on the porch of the house, the one I had built, watching the light move across the garden, and he said to me, almost as if he was thinking out loud, "She always did know how to make you feel like the unreasonable one." He was talking about Renata. He did not say anything else. I did not need him to. About 4 months after the settlement, Renata called me. It was a Saturday morning. I almost did not pick up, then I did. She cried for the first few minutes. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said Cliff had pressured her into things she would not have chosen on her own. She said she was sorry. She said she missed me and she missed our parents being a real family. She said she just wanted to come to Sunday dinner again. I listened to all of it. When she stopped talking, I said I appreciated her calling. I said I was glad she was reflecting on things. I said I did not hate her and I did not want to be enemies. Then I said something I had thought about many times before saying it. I said that the word sorry was the beginning of something, not the end of it. I said that what happened was not a small mistake or a moment of confusion. It was a deliberate legal action taken while I was out of state, using my parents as instruments, to remove me from something I had built from nothing. I said I would never pretend that did not happen. I said I needed to see what changed before I could sit at a table with her again the way things used to be. She started to cry again. She said that was fair. She said she understood. She asked if there was anything she could do. I said time W. Would answer that better than I could right now. We said goodbye. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. The months that followed were the strangest kind of peaceful. I visited my parents nearly every other weekend. My mother's garden came to life in a way that made the backyard look like something from a magazine. My father repainted the garage door a deep green because he had always wanted a green garage door, and now there was no one to tell him it was not sensible. I brought groceries sometimes. I stayed for Sunday dinner. We watched bad television on the wide sectional I had chosen for the living room. My mother fell asleep during movies and my father pretended not to notice. I started sleeping better. I had not fully realized how poorly I had been sleeping for the previous year until I was no longer doing it. I had not fully realized how much of my mental space had been occupied by low-grade dread, the kind that does not announce itself but sits behind everything you do and makes the world feel slightly less stable than it should. Without it, I felt lighter in a way that was almost physical. Work went well. My consultancy added 2 new long-term clients in the spring. I hired 2 more people. I moved into a better office. I signed a lease on an apartment I actually liked instead of the functional but joyless place I had been living in because I had been too distracted to bother finding something better. I went on a trip to Portugal I had been postponing for 3 years. I walked around old cities by myself and ate long dinners and slept with the windows open and did not look at my phone for hours at a time. It was one of the better weeks of my adult life. Cliff and Renata, I later heard through my mother, had separated about 7 months after the settlement. My mother mentioned it carefully in the way she mentions things she does not know how to feel about. She said Renata was doing okay. She said Cliff had moved to another city. She said she thought the whole thing had changed Renata in ways that were hard to watch. I did not say much. I asked if Renata was all right practically, if she had a stable place to live, if she needed anything. My mother said she was managing. I nodded and we moved on to other things. I do not spend much time thinking about Cliff. He was never really the point. He was a symptom. He was someone who looked at what I had built and saw something to acquire, and he found a person close enough to me to make it possible. What I think about more when I think about it at all is Renata. I think about the fact that she saw my love for our parents as a resource. I think about how far back that calculation went. I think about all the moments over all the years when I thought we were close and wonder how much of that closeness was real and how much of it was useful to her. I do not have a clean answer to that. I am not sure I need one. What I know is this: I built something real. I built it alone, quietly, over years from love. People tried to take it. They used paperwork and absence and the trust my parents had in people who looked like family. They almost succeeded. And then I gathered everything I had documented, everything I had saved and kept and organized, because that is who I am, and I let the evidence speak. I did not need to scream. I did not need to perform. I did not need to beg or plead or humiliate anyone in a public confrontation. I just needed to show what was true, clearly and completely, to the right people at the right time. The house still stands. It is a beautiful house. My parents grow old in it the way I imagined them growing old in it when I first found that piece of land and stood under the old trees and heard the creek and made the decision. My father has a favorite chair on the porch now. My mother's garden has tomatoes she is inordinately proud of and several varieties of flowers whose names I will never be able to keep straight. When I pull into the driveway on a Saturday morning and my father comes out to meet me and my mother calls from somewhere inside that the coffee is ready, that house is exactly what I meant it to be, exactly what I built it to be. And there is nobody in the world who can put their name on that. If this story hit you somewhere real, I want you to stay with the feeling for a second, because what happened to Marcus is not rare. It happens in the quiet space between generosity and assumption. It happens in families where one person loves harder and gives more and stays patient longer, and the people around them start to treat that patience as permission. If you have ever been the one who builds things for people who take, if you have ever watched your loyalty get mistaken for weakness, then you already know what Marcus felt standing on that porch. The question I want to leave with you is this: at what point does protecting yourself stop being selfish and start being necessary? Leave your answer below, and if this kind of Rye speaks to you, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss the next one, because the next story is already waiting.